This is the Zagros cluster. It is the home system of my Mothership campaign. At its center, connecting to all of the myriad planets and satellites within its reach, is Magatsu Ward Orbital Habitation Zone 1. The locals call it Ortega. Ortega, an A-class station housing 4 million beings, a mass of arterial streets and service tunnels, is a way for my table to explore cyberpunk within industrial sci-fi horror. Two hallmarks of their respective subgenres are Ridley Scott's Blade Runner and Alien. Though I could speak on the similarities and differences between the two subgenres, I'll keep my analysis to this simple dichotomy. Cyberpunk is about suffocation, the teeming crush of millions crammed into the intestines of a machine that can't support them. The corporation is ever present, foes are around every corner, and though resources are great, they often are in the possession of those who would have you barter your soul in exchange for them. Industrial sci-fi horror is about isolation. It's about the limiting factors around you. Your lifeline to civilization is the corporation, and they've declared you expendable. There is no help coming, your resources are dwindling, and your resolve is under constant threat from forces both within and without. Both subgenres of science fiction are about loneliness, one in a vast void, and the other in an innumerable crowd. Industrial sci-fi is scary, cyberpunk is cool. Emphasize the guns and chrome of cyberpunk when the characters are riding high, and the oxygen tanks and failing batteries of industrial sci-fi when they're falling hard. Emphasize power and conspiracy. Emphasize factions you can't outgun. Emphasize a predatory medical system. Emphasize the broken hearts and dramatic betrayals of every lost loved one the crew has ever tried to forget. After all, once we were close and close-knit, but now we are unmoored islands, each alone, each a separate planet, drifting farther and farther away, content to turn ever inward. This is no idle solipsism. It has taken on the fragile brightness of truth. Cities turn from cities, self-devouring, governments fragmenting into fragments of fragments. Entertainment become a solitary diversion. Solo adventures. My approach to Ortega for the crew and my table is to lean into the generative aspects of Mothership. I cannot write out every detail of an A-class station, but I can use randomness to simulate scale. As the RSV Fidanza limps towards Zagros' beating heart, I will ask my crew to discover Ortega Station with me. While the full breakdown of Prospero's dream is interesting and can offer great examples on how to run factions and their goals, I will need the generators in the back of the module to create Ortega. The process will go something like this. First, flip to the Space Station Toolkit on page 46. There are two fill-in-the-blank tables depending on if the station is in core space or rim space. Before presenting these to the players, I will fill out the room cost and percentage options, leaving the more flavorful ones up to player input. Keep the crisis percentage roll in mind for future visits to the station. You can tie factions that you generate into that central tension. Second, we decide which company factions from the system might have a presence on the station and note that down. After that, we use the noteworthy locations charts on pages 54 and 55 to define what the most important modules are on the station. If the crew wants something specific, consider what class of station they're visiting. On an A-class station, there is likely to be an establishment for it. On an X-class station, roll a D percentile with a 15 to 20% chance what they are looking for is there. Pages 42 and 43 feature a list of establishments, their prices, and example names. This is useful in populating your station with extra services or locations as needed by the crew. While Pound of Flesh does feature a random denizens page, that's 44 and 45, their motivations are somewhat specific to Prospero's dream. To better capture the feeling of cyberpunk while still relying on random generation, I'll use the NPC generator out of Cyborg. From that point on, it's a matter of making faction pages for the various station factions, keeping track of allies and enemies, and running shore leave as described in the PSG. When I present Ortega to my players, I'm going to ask them what kind of life they have there. What sort of faction do they interact with? I might do up a D5 list of the power players on the station. The key here is to tailor an introductory question to the crew so they get a sense of the station's class and the way it shaped their lives. An X-class station will have them in debt to someone. A C-class station might have them abandoned there by someone. This gives us tone and an NPC to bring into the game going forward. Pound of Flesh is also a great resource for cyberware and slickware augmentations. Random spacer drugs, Cyborg also has a generator for random drugs, and a station random encounter table on pages 40 and 41. I recommend pulling ideas for cyberware from Cyborg and Cyberpunk 2020. Show your players cyberware by having NPCs and UCRs use it on them. If they see the tech on the street, they'll want to get some for themselves. If your players want the neuroports and holophones of Cyberpunk Edgerunners, give them the Ogre and Slick Socket cyber mods from Pound of Flesh. If they want speedware, there's the Twitch Booster Slickware. Anything else can be easily adapted from equipment to cybermod by using the Pound of Flesh rules. Lightning round. Here are some resources for Mothership to add more cyberpunk material to your space stations. The Hacker's Handbook pamphlet adds a simple node-based hacking framework to the game, as well as equipment and a class-neutral replacement loadout. There's a roll table for system security response, keeping the focus on the heightened danger of failure. The version I have was published for 0E. The first edition version should have more loadouts. Hull Breach Volume 1's following articles. Page 10 has the handoff, a guide to deals with factions or corporations and the complications that can arise. Page 40 is Pound of Mysteries, a guide to building a web of clues and running investigation or social horror. Page 74 is Residue Processing, a zero-level funnel for Mothership where your players are nameless test subjects in a facility full of artifacts and strange corporate assets. It's great for starting a game where your crew is immediately on the run from a corporate black site. Page 146 is Siesta 3 Autonomous Zone, an X-class station occupied by an anarchist commune, the total opposite of somewhere like Prospero's dream. It's tiny, it's vulnerable, and it's an anti-corporate hub for your campaign. Page 184 is Corpocrat Dogs, a generator for corporate fixers and C-levels, complete with their own secrets and missions. Pages 206 to 209 are Assets, more equipment and devious corporate projects. The IP recuperation table and corporate obelisk are deliciously evil, and your next corporation absolutely should use them. Breach of Contract is a complete guide to legal procedures in Mothership, including a lawyer NPC generator, a lawyer class, and ready-to-fill contracts to make spacer life just a little more restrictive. Ian Newsom's Agent class for players as C-levels or corporate assets gone rogue. There are rules here for espionage, but those are entirely optional. If you don't want to use a new class, androids can be treated as direct corporate assets or corporate-controlled C-level Borgs. There are other TTRPGs I'm going to pull from as resources. I've already mentioned Cyborg, the Morkborg cyberpunk hack. It's loaded with fantastic art and useful generators for NPCs, city and net events, and a mission generator. While the world presented in Cyborg is far closer to collapse than Mothership, it offers a lot of inspiration for bringing horror back to the genre. The Edgerunner's Toolkit for Cyberpunk Red is a hard one to recommend. Cyberpunk as a system has a more detailed combat minigame and a lot of setting-specific game material. That said, there are a few things that can be used in your Mothership game. First, the 3 rules at the start of the Edgerunner's Handbook are great advice to offer your crew. Everyday Life is a good section for adding flavor to your station, and the Life Path. You can use almost any Cyberpunk RPG life path, but this one is fast and lean. This is useful when you're starting on a station. You can instantly assign a personal style, family background, and friends and enemies to a new character. While you might want to tailor some of it more to your station, it gives you ways to hook the crew into scenarios by exploiting their connections. I'll save most of my specific thoughts on Cyberpunk RPG for another day. It's worth looking at these books as a genre coalescing. In the same way that something like Dungeons & Dragons codified what a fantasy world looked like, the Cyberpunk RPG did the same for its movement in the early 90s. If you want to use anything mechanic-wise from the game system, I would lean into the life path roll tables as a further way to add connections. Now this might seem counterintuitive, encouraging using all of these mechanics for generating places and people when I initially introduced this game as lonely. As said before, Cyberpunk is loneliness in a crowd. It's a world of options having become paywalled. It's everything you need at a price you can't pay. It's a city full of people you can't necessarily trust. Sure, you may have connections, but those connections' loyalties have price tags. To really make your game cyberpunk, keep this in mind. The corporation is happy to buy out your contract and take the weight off your crew's shoulders. All it costs is your soul. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that this month, from November 12th to December 10th, 2024, is Mothership Month. 21 creators are funding modules on BackerKit, and there's a game jam coming out on itch.io. Personally, I want to highlight Death Pays All Debts and PK49. These modules seem like they'd be the easiest to plug into your game for cyberpunk scenarios, both being tower crawls aboard space stations. For their part, Tuesday Night Games is funding Wages of Sin, a book full of one-shot scenario bounties that can easily become the center point of your next session. As always, thanks for watching the broadcast. I've got links for everything down in the description, and I'd love to hear your input on cyberpunk scenarios you think would adapt perfectly to Mothership.